The sun hung low in the sky as the mourners gathered around Elaine's grave, their faces somber and filled with silent grief. But nothing could prepare Anna for the sight that would shatter the calm of the day. As the crowd began to disperse, Paul stepped forward, not alone, but with a woman and two small children in tow. They were unfamiliar to Anna, their presence a stark contrast to the pain of the funeral. The woman smiled faintly at Anna, and the children clung to her legs, their innocent faces oblivious to the chaos they were about to ignite. Anna's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? How could Paul, her husband, the man she had spent years building a life with, be standing here with this new family, his new wife and children, as if nothing had ever happened? Her mind raced as the truth began to take shape, each fragment of the puzzle falling into place with gut-wrenching clarity. The confusion, the heartbreak, the overwhelming betrayal, it all hit Anna like a tidal wave. Paul had kept this hidden from her for so long, and now, here they were. The emotions surged through her, leaving her speechless, but the questions burned in her mind. When had this started? Why hadn't she seen the signs? And what did this mean for their marriage? As the crowd thinned and the reality of the moment settled in, Anna couldn't help but wonder, was this the man she had married, or had she been living with a stranger all along? Before the funeral, before the secrets, Anna and Paul had been just like any other couple, happy, hopeful, and in love. Their life together had been filled with shared dreams, cozy nights at home, and the kind of companionship that made them feel inseparable. They had their ups and downs, of course, but nothing out of the ordinary for a couple in love. They built a home together, and even though they weren't perfect, they always had each other's backs. Paul had always been a loving husband, attentive and caring. He had a quiet strength that balanced Anna's more outgoing nature. And together, they made a team. They talked about their future often, vacations, children, the kind of life they'd build once Paul's mother, Elaine, was no longer a daily presence in their lives. It had been an unspoken understanding that once Elaine no longer needed Paul's care, they would have more freedom to explore their life together as a couple. But then, tragedy struck. Elaine's health began to decline rapidly, and Paul's attention shifted. The once supportive husband became distant, consumed by his mother's needs. The routine they had built together was slowly replaced by visits to the hospital and endless discussions about Elaine's care. It wasn't just that Paul's attention was divided, it was that his emotional focus seemed to solely lie with his mother. Anna felt it, the shift in their relationship, the growing gap between them, the late-night phone calls, the long absences, the guilt-ridden eyes when Paul returned home, exhausted and drained. As Elaine's health worsened, the tension between Anna and Paul intensified. Anna had always known that Elaine was a big part of Paul's life, but she hadn't realized just how deeply it would affect their marriage. It felt like everything Anna had once known about her husband was slipping away, replaced by a version of Paul she didn't recognize. A man whose loyalty was now divided, leaving her feeling like a bystander in her own life. It was then that Anna began to notice things, small, unsettling clues that hinted at a deeper divide. Why had Paul been so distant? What was he hiding? These questions lingered in Anna's mind, foreshadowing the shocking revelations that would soon tear their world apart. The conversation was inevitable, but Anna wasn't prepared for how much it would shake her. One evening, after weeks of subtle hints, Paul sat Anna down and dropped the bombshell. He wanted her to move in with his mother. Elaine had recently lost her husband, and Paul felt responsible for looking after her. His voice was steady, but his eyes were pleading, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Anna, I know this isn't ideal, but I really need you to understand. Mom can't be alone anymore, and we need to be there for her, Paul said. his gaze not meeting hers. Anna stared at him, her chest tightening. The thought of moving in with Elaine was the last thing she wanted. She had always felt like an outsider in her mother-in-law's home, like she was constantly walking on eggshells. Elaine's sharp opinions and overbearing presence had made it clear that she didn't see Anna as an equal. The thought of living under that roof again, with no space to breathe, was suffocating. "Paul, I'm not sure I can do this," Anna admitted, frustration creeping into her voice. "I don't know how I can live with your mother full time. She's demanding. She's always watching, always critiquing everything." Paul's face softened, but his response was firm. "I need your support, Anna. This is my family. She's not well, and I can't do this alone. You know I've always been there for you, right? This is my turn to ask for something." Anna's internal conflict surged. She wanted to be the supportive wife Paul needed, but the idea of surrendering her independence, her space, to live under Elaine's roof felt like a betrayal to herself. She felt torn between honoring Paul's request and preserving her own sense of self. In the end, Anna agreed. She wasn't ready to admit how much she dreaded the idea, but she didn't want to add to Paul's burden. The decision wasn't just about moving in with Elaine. It was about her relationship with Paul, how much she was willing to give up for him, and whether that would be enough to hold their fragile marriage together. Living with Elaine quickly proved to be more than Anna had bargained for. The house, once a place of occasional visits, now felt like a cage. Every corner was a reminder of the life Anna had tried to distance herself from. The constant presence of her mother-in-law, the unspoken expectations, and the heavy silence that hung over every meal. Elaine's critical eye never stopped. Whether it was the way Anna arranged the furniture or the food she prepared, nothing was ever quite right. It wasn't long before Anna found herself walking on eggshells, her every move scrutinized. The comments came in waves, sharp and biting, each one chipping away at Anna's patience and sense of self-worth. "You're doing it wrong," Elaine would say, or, "That's not how I would have done it." It felt like nothing she did was ever good enough. The lack of privacy only added to the tension. Every room in the house felt like an extension of Elaine's watchful gaze, and Anna's frustration grew daily. The few moments she tried to escape, whether by retreating to the kitchen to prepare a meal or sneaking away for a walk, were always interrupted by Elaine's constant need for attention. "What are you doing?" Elaine would ask, her voice tight with suspicion. "You should be helping me, not hiding away." Paul's distance only made things worse. He had always been a loving husband, but now, as the weight of his mother's care wore on him, he became less and less available to Anna. His visits to Elaine's room became longer, his excuses more frequent, until Anna barely saw him at all. When they did talk, the conversations were hollow, surface-level exchanges that only highlighted how far apart they had grown. Anna couldn't shake the feeling that she was invisible to Paul. He seemed so consumed by Elaine's needs that he no longer noticed her exhaustion, her loneliness. The deep connection they once shared seemed to fade into the background, buried beneath the strain of the constant caregiving. As the days passed, Anna's frustration built. She was emotionally drained, worn out from the constant pressure of living in Elaine's house. The woman who had once been her mother-in-law was now an oppressive force in her life, and Paul, her husband, was slipping further away. The tension between Anna and Paul grew, and with each passing day, it seemed less likely that the marriage they once knew would survive the storm they were trapped in. At first, Anna chalked up Paul's increasing distance to the pressures of caregiving. He was spending more and more time at work, his hours stretching longer, and when he was home, he was often preoccupied, his mind elsewhere. His once warm, affectionate demeanor had shifted into something more cold, distant, almost mechanical. Anna found herself staring at the back of his head during meals, wishing for a meaningful conversation, a simple connection.
but it never came. The strain of living with Elaine, the constant demands from his mother, and his own growing responsibilities seemed to swallow Paul whole. But what troubled Anna most wasn't just the exhaustion on his face. It was the emotional void that seemed to grow between them. The man she had married was no longer present, replaced by someone who was emotionally unavailable, barely acknowledging her presence. She tried to reach out, to talk about their feelings, but Paul brushed it off, always deflecting with a tired sigh or an excuse about how much work there was to do.
Anna began to feel a creeping suspicion that something was off. There were moments when she would catch him staring at his phone with a strange intensity, or receive curt, disinterested responses when she tried to engage with him. He had always been her partner, her confidant, but now he felt like a stranger. She couldn't shake the feeling that Paul was hiding something he wasn't ready to share. Every time she broached the subject, Paul would close off, the walls between them thickening even more. Despite her growing concerns, Anna chose to focus on caring for Elaine, not wanting to add more pressure to Paul's already stressed existence. But in the back of her mind, the doubt lingered. What was Paul hiding? And why did it feel like their marriage was unraveling right before her eyes? Anna's worst fears came to life one evening when Paul casually dropped a bombshell. He had bought an apartment. For himself. "I've been thinking about it for a while," Paul said, his voice flat, almost indifferent, as if the announcement meant nothing at all. "It's a good investment, and I'll have more space for when I need it." Anna froze, the words hanging in the air, her mind scrambling to process what Paul had just said. "Wait, what do you mean you bought an apartment? You're leaving us?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but her heart was pounding. Paul's response was dismissive. "It's not like that, Anna. I'm still here. It's just something I needed to do." The hurt that swelled inside Anna was almost unbearable. He had made a huge decision, without her. She had been living in Elaine's house, sacrificing her own comfort for the family, and now Paul was retreating further, creating space for himself, physically and emotionally. The thought of him spending money, Elaine's money, on a separate place, away from her, felt like a betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Anna's voice cracked, the tension between them escalating. Paul shrugged, his expression vacant. "I didn't think it was a big deal. It's just an apartment. It's an investment, Anna. Business. The word hung in the air like a sharp, cold reminder that this was no longer about their life together. Anna's heart sank as she realized the growing chasm between them was more than just a physical space. It was emotional, and it was widening every day. Anna's anger flared. "You can't be serious. You've been sneaking around making big decisions like this without even consulting me. You're gambling with your mother's savings, and you didn't think I should know?" The argument that followed was heated, full of sharp words and accusations, and it ended with Anna feeling more isolated than ever. The emotional distance between them had just grown, and the man she married seemed more like a stranger than ever before. As if the tension in the house wasn't enough, a new struggle arose when Elaine's health took a sharp decline. One morning, Anna found her mother-in-law slumped in her chair, struggling to speak, her face pale and flushed with fever. Panic gripped Anna as she called for help. But even as the paramedics arrived, she could see the signs. Elaine wasn't going to recover this time. In the hospital, the doctor's words were grim. Elaine needed constant care, and the likelihood of recovery was slim. Anna's heart broke as she watched the woman who had once been so strong slip away before her eyes. But the real shock came when Paul, usually so attentive, seemed completely unfazed by the news. Anna's initial shock quickly turned to frustration. "Paul, we need to figure out how to care for her. She's your mother," she said. But Paul's response was cold, distant. "I can't deal with this right now, Anna.
I've got other things to focus on, he replied, his voice flat, his eyes distant. Anna was left standing, dumbfounded, as Paul turned away. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. Paul was no longer her partner in this. He was pulling away, leaving Anna to face the challenge alone. His indifference stung, but Anna didn't have time to dwell on it. As Elaine's health deteriorated, Anna took on the responsibility of caring for her mother-in-law alone. The toll was immense: long hours, sleepless nights, and the emotional weight of watching someone slip away. But Anna kept pushing forward. There were moments when the exhaustion became too much, when the weight of everything felt unbearable. But she couldn't let go. Every day, she wondered if Paul would show up, if he would step up and care for his mother. But more often than not, he was absent, physically and emotionally. Anna was left to navigate this painful chapter of her life alone, her marriage to Paul becoming more and more fragile as each day passed.
The funeral was a somber event, a final farewell to Elaine, the woman Anna had cared for so deeply. The air was thick with grief, yet everything felt strangely off that day. As Anna stood near the gravesite, her eyes locked on the familiar figure of Paul, who had arrived late as usual. But he wasn't alone. With him were two small children, both clinging to his side, their faces unfamiliar and uncertain. Anna's heart skipped a beat. Paul wasn't just late. He had brought a woman, someone Anna had never seen before. She was elegant but carried an air of unfamiliarity, as though she didn't belong. Her expression was calm, too calm for a funeral, as she held the hands of the children, her posture almost protective. Anna's mind raced. Who was this woman, and why had Paul kept her a secret? As Paul walked over to Anna, introducing the woman as Carol, his wife, everything around Anna seemed to blur. Time felt suspended as she processed the words, her head spinning. Carol? His wife? Anna's thoughts crashed into each other. How could Paul be married to someone else? She barely had the chance to catch her breath before Paul continued, introducing the children as his. Anna stood frozen, her heart sinking into her stomach. The world seemed to stop turning. Her hands trembled as she tried to understand the scene unfolding before her eyes. This was the man she had spent years with, the man who had promised to love her. But here he was, standing with another family, a life she had no part in. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. How could Paul keep such a massive secret from her, all while she had been fighting to care for his ailing mother? Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to focus on what was happening, but the pain was too great. The questions swirled in her mind. When did this happen? Was this all part of a lie she had been living? Anna felt a wave of heartbreak, confusion, and disbelief wash over her. The funeral, which should have been about closure, had become the most defining moment of her life. A moment that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her trust, and her future. The moment the funeral ended, Anna's world was a blur of emotions. She couldn't even bring herself to follow the others to the wake. Instead, she demanded Paul's attention, her voice shaking with both disbelief and fury. They stood outside the church, a small distance from the others, and Anna's voice broke as she confronted him. Who is she, Paul? And those kids? What's going on? Anna's words were slow, deliberate, as if she needed him to hear every one of them. Paul remained eerily calm, his face expressionless. He was not the man she knew. The distance between them now felt like an abyss. You really want to know, Anna? His tone was almost casual, as if he had expected this moment to come. I deserve to know, Anna shot back, her voice rising. You've been living a double life, and you think I'm just supposed to accept this? You have another wife, another family, and you didn't tell me? Paul exhaled sharply.
clearly irritated by her outburst. I didn't think it was any of your business, Anna. It's complicated, okay? I didn't know how to tell you. Complicated? Anna's voice was tight with rage. How is this complicated? You've been lying to me. You've been keeping this whole family a secret, and I had no idea. You're married to her, Paul. You're married to someone else, and you have kids with her. How long has this been going on? Paul's gaze flickered away for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was no apology, no sorrow in his voice. I didn't want to hurt you. But yes, I've been married to Carol for a while now. I've kept her and the kids separate from you because I thought it was easier that way. I didn't want to complicate things. Easier? Easier for who, Paul? Anna's voice broke with the weight of his coldness. You've made a fool of me. How could you do this to me after everything? I didn't mean for things to get out of hand, Paul said, his voice unfeeling. But it's done now, Anna. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. Anna felt the anger bubble over. She couldn't believe the man standing before her, this stranger who had once been her husband. His coldness, his lack of remorse, it all hit her like a slap. You've moved on? You've been living a lie this entire time, and you expect me to just move on? You think this is something I can just accept? Paul shrugged indifferently. What's done is done. We've both got our own lives now. The words stung, but Anna could feel her own fury rising. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The life they had built, the love she had trusted, was all a lie. As she stood there, facing the man she had loved, the realization hit her like a cold wave. It was over. Her marriage, her trust, and everything she had known were gone. The funeral was barely over when Anna found herself thrust into yet another storm. This time, it was over Elaine's will. At the reading, she learned that everything Elaine had owned, her house, her savings, everything, had been left to Anna. She sat in stunned silence, the lawyer's voice echoing in her ears as he read the last words of Elaine's will. Elaine's final wishes were clear, the lawyer said. She has left all her assets, including her property, to Anna. Anna's heart pounded in her chest, but before she could process the full impact, she heard Paul's voice rising in protest. This can't be right, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Mom would never do this. Lucy, standing beside him, didn't hide her anger. She can't just leave everything to Anna. This is our inheritance, not hers. We're family. Anna looked at them, her stomach turning with the realization that the betrayal went deeper than she had ever imagined. She had never expected anything from Elaine. She had been focused on caring for her. But now, she found herself the recipient of everything. Paul and Lucy were enraged. They wasted no time in announcing their plan to contest the will. This isn't over, Anna, Lucy spat, her eyes cold with hatred. You think you can just take everything? We'll make sure you don't get away with it. Anna sat quietly, her heart still reeling from the betrayal of both Paul and Lucy. Their greedy reaction felt like the final confirmation that their family dynamic had been fractured beyond repair. What had once been a family she had loved and tried to help was now a broken, hostile battleground. As Anna looked at Paul and Lucy, their anger and accusations felt hollow. She had no intention of backing down. This battle for Elaine's legacy was only just beginning, and Anna knew one thing for sure. She would fight for Elaine's wishes and for herself, no matter what came next. As Anna sat alone in the quiet of her home later that night, her thoughts drifted back to the will reading. Elaine's final decision, leaving everything to Anna, felt both surreal and overwhelming. The mix of emotions was impossible to shake. There was anger at the betrayal she had suffered from Paul, betrayal that still felt fresh in her heart. But there was also a strange sense of closure, something Anna had longed for, but never truly expected. Elaine had always been difficult, sometimes cold, yet there had been moments, however fleeting, where she showed glimpses of affection. In her final years, Anna had been there for Elaine when no one else was. She had cared for her when Paul was too distracted by his own life to notice, and Anna had done it out of a sense of duty, not for any material gain. Yet in the end, Elaine's decision felt like a final acknowledgement, a validation of Anna's devotion. Anna's fingers trembled as she traced the edge of the envelope that contained the will. She could almost feel Elaine's presence in the room, the woman who had been so hard to understand, yet had chosen Anna to be the one to inherit everything. It wasn't just about the house, the money, or the property. It was about the final act of kindness from someone who had never fully shown her appreciation until the end. Despite all the pain and betrayal, Anna couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward Elaine. In her own way, Elaine had given Anna the one thing she needed most: recognition. In that moment, Anna realized that even though it hadn't been easy, she had loved and cared for Elaine more than anyone else ever had. And now, despite everything, she would honor that gift. The air in the room was thick with tension as Anna stood across from Paul and Lucy, both of them seething with rage after the will reading. The anger in their eyes was unmistakable, and Anna could feel the heat of their accusations bearing down on her. "You think you're entitled to this?" Lucy sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "You've been playing the perfect little daughter-in-law while manipulating Elaine into giving you everything. It's disgusting." Paul didn't speak at first, but his silence spoke volumes. His eyes, cold, calculating, were fixed on Anna, and for the first time, she saw him for what he truly was: a man who had abandoned her, betrayed her, and now wanted to take everything from her. "You have no right to this," Paul finally said, his voice laced with anger. "Elaine wouldn't have wanted you to have it. She was under your control, Anna. You used her to get what you wanted. You're no better than a thief." Anna's heart thundered in her chest, but she stood tall, her spine straight as she met their accusations head on. She could feel the anger rising, but she refused to back down. She wouldn't let them paint her as the villain, not after everything she had done for them, and for Elaine. "You think I manipulated her?" Anna's voice was calm, but every word held a quiet power. "I gave everything to care for Elaine. I was there when no one else was. Where were you, Paul? Where was your support when she needed it most? You were too busy with your other family to care." Paul's face contorted with frustration, but Anna didn't stop. "Elaine trusted me. She knew that I cared for her in a way that neither of you ever did. I never asked for anything in return, but she gave me this because she recognized that. Not because of manipulation, but because I earned it." Lucy scoffed, but Anna could see the crack in her confidence. "I've done nothing wrong," Anna continued, her voice unwavering. "I'm not stealing anything. Elaine made her choice. You need to accept that." The confrontation was a silent battle of wills, but Anna's strength, born from years of heartbreak and sacrifice, shone through. Paul and Lucy were furious, but Anna knew that, in the end, she had been the one to truly honor Elaine. And now she would defend that legacy, no matter the cost. The weight of Anna's realization hit her hard as she sat quietly in the empty house, the echo of Paul's absence hanging in the air. She had fought for their marriage for so long, trying to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage of their life together. But now she understood that there was nothing left to save. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had chosen a different path, one that did not include her. The anger that once burned inside her had transformed into something more powerful: clarity. Anna knew that she had to let go. The constant betrayal, the emotional distance, the way Paul had disregarded her in favor of his new family, it was all too much. The decision to file for divorce didn't come easily, but as Anna sat in the silence of the house that had once been their home, she knew it was the only choice left. Despite the sorrow that tugged at her heart, she felt an undeniable sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, she was taking control of her own life. The tears that had once flowed freely now felt like a release, a shedding of all the pain that had been keeping her chained to a past that no longer served her. Anna was moving forward, no longer weighed down by the ghost of a marriage that had been nothing more than a facade. As she made the call to her lawyer, a small part of her ached at the thought of what could have been. But she knew that her future was brighter without Paul. With each passing moment, Anna felt the heavy burden of her past lifting, replaced by the freedom to build a life on her own terms. The decision to move forward with her life, to embrace the inheritance that Elaine had left her, felt like the first real step Anna had taken toward healing. The money, the house, these weren't just material possessions. They were symbols of the strength she had found within herself. The inheritance wasn't just a windfall. It was a chance to rebuild, to finally create the life she had always wanted but had never been able to achieve while living in the shadows of others.
Anna began by renovating the house, not just physically, but emotionally. With each brushstroke of paint, each new piece of furniture, she felt herself coming alive again. The house that had once been filled with memories of betrayal now echoed with the possibility of new beginnings. She wasn't just transforming the space, she was transforming herself. The broken, lost woman who had once been swallowed up by her marriage to Paul was slowly fading away, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and fully aware of her worth. She threw herself into work, taking classes, starting new projects, and meeting new people. Anna found herself doing things she had never allowed herself to do before, pushing past the fears and doubts that had held her back for so long. The world felt wider now, full of opportunities she had once thought were out of reach. The house became her sanctuary, a place where she could finally breathe freely. And as the days passed, Anna realized that her future wasn't defined by the past. The life she had once shared with Paul was over, but it didn't have to dictate who she was anymore. She was starting from scratch, and the possibilities were endless. The woman who had been betrayed, abandoned, and broken was now standing tall, ready to embrace the future with open arms. For the first time in years, Anna felt proud of herself. As Anna stood in the doorway of the house that had once been a prison, she reflected on everything she had been through. The pain, the heartache, the betrayal, they had all been part of her journey. But what mattered most was that she had survived it all. She had learned lessons that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The importance of self-worth, the strength that comes from standing up for yourself, and the undeniable truth that no one should ever stay in a relationship that diminishes who they are. Anna had grown, transformed into a woman who no longer needed to rely on anyone else for her happiness or sense of purpose. She had learned to trust herself and trust the process of healing, even when the road seemed long and uncertain. But as she looked ahead, Anna knew there would always be a lingering sense of sadness. The past could never be erased, and some wounds would take time to fully heal. Yet she was free now, free from the chains of betrayal, free from the toxic relationship she had once fought so hard to keep. With the sun setting behind her, casting a warm golden glow over the house, Anna smiled softly. There was a quiet strength in her that had been forged through her struggles. And while the future remained uncertain, Anna knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. Her journey had just begun, and she would face it with courage and hope. The story of her heartbreak had come to an end, but the story of her future was just beginning,